Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another session in the podcast series of the Alchemy Lab with me, Colin Holland. I'm the author of a book that's just been published called The Secret of the Alchemist. And one of the reasons why I've called my podcast the Alchemy Lab is that it's a metaphor, in a way, for introducing some amazing people who during their lifetimes have gone through what the alchemists called transmutation or transformation. And my guest today is no exception from that. My guest is a very, very experienced consultant psychotherapist, which is fantastic. In fact, I think this is the first time we've had somebody who's been involved in psychotherapy for the amount of time that he has. And so I want to introduce the amazing Martin Wells. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I notice you've got a few grey things sticking out of your head like I do. So we've been around together, I think doing on different paths, but during the same sort of period in history of our lives. Now, you are based in Bristol, correct?
Yes.
And you are a teaching and supervising transactional analyst, and we'll get you to explain to folk what that is, because I don't think everybody maybe has heard of one of those. And you've been studying specifically meditation for the last 30 years in various shapes and forms, but you're also working in the NHS, which for our non-British listeners, the NHS is the equivalent of it is the National Health Service, which is state-owned in the UK. Well, at the moment, still. We won't get into that subject. But you've been working there as a consultant psychotherapist during that time, and there in particular, you say that you integrate the non-dual teachings with psychotherapy, and we'll get you to explain that in just a moment. You're also a founder of TA Spiritual, which again we'll ask you to explain. But you run retreats. You've run retreats all over Europe and in India. So welcome.
Thank you.
I've got a feeling we're going to have lots to talk about. I think we're maybe going to run out of time. We might need a second session at some point. But tell us a little bit about your day-to-day work.
Well, my NHS work at the moment actually all from home, so it's online, but it's a range of individual therapy, group therapy, which is mindfulness, and usually supervision groups as well, or teaching seminars, etc. So that's the sort of range of my NHS work.
And do you want to explain a little bit of what is TA Spiritual? You're the founder. Is this a school? What is this?
TA stands for transactional analysis, which is very briefly, it's Eric Burns' teachings from the 1960s, games people play. And he was a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist, very informed by psychoanalysis, who thought that we could draw a lot of information from very small amounts of a conversation, from transactions. And of course that's been in the tradition of psychotherapy. So it's more been a psychological process. And for me, when I started learning about it, the spiritual aspect of it was missing, really. So I just started. It's not really an organization. It's more of a concept that people can relate to in terms of what does it mean to apply spirituality to transactional analysis.
Okay. Now, in your description of what you do, and I quoted it here, that you integrate non-dual teaching with psychotherapy. So normally are they separate, or is there a form of psychotherapy that doesn't include non-dual teaching? Do you want to explain to us a little bit about both? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think in some ways it's quite unusual for non-duality to be part of psychotherapy.
Okay.
Usually we're talking about, well, we're talking about two people in the room engaged in change, in terms of one helping the other change. Now, a non-dual perspective offers something quite radically different, really. So from a non-dual perspective, as a therapist, I'm not really trying to do anything, and I'm not really trying to help the person change or do anything, because what I'm more doing, if I'm doing anything, is affirming that they're already where they need to be. They're already, in a sense, their true nature is who they are. And the rest of it is fiction, is a narrative, it's a story. Not that I would ignore those stories, but that's not fundamentally who we are. So a non-dual therapist is interested in true nature beyond the personal story.
Okay. In my book, The Secret of the Alchemist, and we're going to come on to your book in a moment, I just want to say,
Yeah.
I explore the whole concept of true self, because like you, I've been a student of Carl Jung for many years. I'm not a qualified psychoanalyst, but I've applied his teaching and his principles to my own life and shared that with others. And in my book, I talk about that and how he was influenced by alchemy. A lifetime student of the principles of alchemy. And in alchemy, one of the things that ancient wisdom teaches is that there needs to be in the psyche a marriage between what the alchemists called the sun and the moon, or the king and the queen, or the male and the female. And in that marriage, out of that marriage, comes this thing called the philosopher's child. And the philosopher's child is their terminology for what Carl Jung would call, what you just mentioned, is the true self.
Yes.
So how, what do we do then? So you're saying that we are our true self.
Yeah.
That we don't need to become our true self, but is there still a sense of discovery of, do you want to explain that?
Yes. Well, there was a sculptor that was once asked, how did he sculpt the horse? And he said, well, I just took away the bits that weren't horse. and in a sense, that's what we're talking about. So the true self is the core, the horse, what we really are. But of course, there's a lot of layers of conditioning and personal narratives and what we think we are, or what we're told we are by caretakers and schools and culture, etc. So in a way, it's a stripping away of what we're not. And in the Hindi tradition, that's called neti neti, not this, not that. And in Christianity, it's called negation. So we're stripping away the false self to reveal the true self. So there's nowhere to go and find it. It's already there. It's just obscured.
Well, you may not believe this, but I actually deliberately, on my own, took a year out of life from work and did a year's dark night of the soul.
Did you?
I did indeed, yes. And I talk about it in my book. I do not recommend it, by the way, as a process to engage in isolation.
Yes.
I did have a couple of people I checked in with every month or so.
Wow.
But I made the decision on my own. I was reading Thomas Merton.
Oh, yes.
And of course, he introduced me through his work, his writings, to St. John of the Cross.
Yes.
Which is where the phrase, with the poem, the classic poem, The Dark Night of the Soul. So that was probably the most horrendous, inconvenient thing I've ever done in my entire life. Where
it's probably an understatement.
Yeah, where I had the hand on the chain ready to pull the plug and say, okay, enough of this, I'm out of this. Let's go back to being let's go back to being the pretend me, because
Yes.
that's more comfortable. But
Yes.
I stuck with it, and I guess I wouldn't have written my book, The Secret of the Alchemist, if it had not been that I'd stuck with that journey.
Yes.
And in the original book, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which is the book that I'm critiquing as well, the young boy makes a similar journey. He leaves his tribe, he leaves his sheep who represent his peers, and he goes to, in the metaphor, he goes to North Africa, which is the journey of alchemy. And alchemists knew all about
Yes.
what you're talking about, this discovery of the true self. And let's talk about your book, because that's one of the main reasons we're here today. Love it, by the way. Love the title.
Thank you.
It wasn't what I was expecting. So your book, Martin, is called Sitting in the Stillness.
Yeah.
And it's available. If you Google, you'll find it comes up on all great online bookshops. Sitting in the Stillness. It's a book. The surprise. I thought you were going to do some theoretical treatise on Eastern meditation, but it's not. What I love about it is it's a book of real stories, of real people's stories, from your clients, of course, anonymously. You've disguised, so nobody gets hurt in the retelling of these.
Yes.
Some individuals, but some couples, people with partners as well. How far back do some of these stories go? How many years back? Is it a lifetime of your work, or is it more recent?
No, one goes back probably 15 years, something like that. But the rest really came very quickly after my own sort of realization and my own transformation, really. So, and that was a bit like a tap being turned on, and story after story came, and as you say, very real stories told articulately by the people themselves, really. So that was quite extraordinary, and I hadn't really set out to write a book. I'd set out to write an article about one of the first story, and then it just had a momentum of its own, really.
Okay. No, I'm not going to let you off the hook.
Okay.
I'm renowned for once I've got you on a hook, I'm going to keep you there. And you can wriggle as much as you like. We're going to hang you in there. So you just said that this flowed after a personal awareness experience, a personal transformation experience. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, of course. I was a member of a meditation network for about 25 years. Broadly, what's called in the progressive path of meditation. So there was a sort of, the teachings were leading us somewhere. If we continued, there was somewhere that we would get to, in a sense. And it made a huge impact on my life. I learned a lot of things, but it came to the point where it just didn't feel right anymore. And that's when I met my colleague and mentor, Jean-Marc Montel, at a conference. And he stood up at the conference and said, in order to be a psychiatrist, you must completely forget you're a psychiatrist. And then he didn't say anything else for 2 minutes, something like that. And then he said something else equally controversial and powerful, really. And that afternoon, really, all my sort of searching and an attempt to find something out there fell away, literally fell away, so that there was a profound stopping and a peacefulness and a stillness that he had pointed to, really. I mean, no one can take us there, but he pointed there. And my sort of version of the dark night of the soul was to leave the organization that I'd been in for 25 years. And I was a senior member of that organization, felt a loyalty and an affection. It was very powerful. But looking back, there was there was no freedom unless I left, and it was a very painful. Yeah, it was a dark night. There was conflict, and there was inside me there was a sense of betrayal. Am I letting people down, etc., etc. So it was a very challenging time, and in equal measure, and I think this is the sort of alchemical aspect of it. In equal measure, it was liberating, and I haven't felt that free ever in my life. I don't think.
So you say in your book that he said, "You are not your story.
Yes.
It is a fiction.
Yeah.
Inquire into who and what you really are." So that was the transformational statement.
Yeah. Yes.
Just then, why did that mean that you didn't pursue the type of meditation activity that you were engaged in? I think a lot of people who are listening are using meditation daily or yoga practices, I know for a fact. So are you saying these aren't of much value, or I think we might need to clarify this a bit.
No, it's a really, really important question, actually. The reason that Jean-Marc talks about the story, and in personal terms, my story was like a lot of other people's, to fundamentally not feel good enough. My mother's German, and I grew up in the 1950s, and there was a sense of there being something wrong with me, and I had to hide being German for obvious reasons, in a sense. So I was drawn to therapy and social work as a way of helping people and feeling better about myself in the process. And also then joining a community and a network, a meditation network, where there was a sense of, if I do this, not only do I belong, but also I can improve myself. I can make myself better because I don't feel fundamentally good about myself. And when that fell away, of course, then there's nowhere to go with meditation. That doesn't mean you stop meditating, but it means that you just be present again with the true nature, and then it's more to do with presence than going anywhere.
It's a different focus then in the meditative.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So many people, I believe, who I talk to every day, are using meditation in the way that in that secondary way that you just described, which is it is a way of centering and grounding.
Yes.
Which are old-fashioned terms for mindfulness.
Yes.
So okay, all right. I'm glad we cleared that up. The practice then of mindfulness, which you teach, which is a phrase that is probably more recent. For those of us that have been talking about it in other ways in the past, enables us, you say in your book, to see the world as it really is, and that is that all things are one. What does that mean in your day-to-day journey from dawn to dusk? How does that in a practical way, when you're working, when you're with your family and so on, what does that mean?
Well, probably the easiest way to talk about that is if we return to the idea of neti, or not this, not that. Then in practical terms, in everything I do, there's that theme of in order to be a psychiatrist, you have to forget you're a psychiatrist. In order to be a therapist, you have to forget you're a therapist. You're not in the role of therapist. In order to be a husband, you're not trying to play the role of husband. You're being that from your true nature. In order to be a parent, there needs to be a certain absence of ego in order for the right thing to emerge. So in practical terms, I'm sort of aware as I'm sitting with people, talking to people, living life, of where ego might interrupt, might separate me. Because when that awareness happens, then there's an awareness of the interconnectedness of everyone and everything.
So if we're interconnected and we're mindful then of that we are just part of one thing,
Yes.
that immediately then just diffuses judgment and
Yes.
criticism and so on. Now, in my book, The Secret of the Alchemist, and I'm noticing in a lot of the stories of your clients, then there is this reference to the shadow
Yes.
self.
Yes.
So for those listening who are not familiar with Carl Jung was the big advocate of the role of the unconscious in our daily life, and that our mind, the brain, is made up of conscious and the unconscious, but the bulk, the biggest part of the mind is the unconscious.
Yes.
And coming to an awareness of what's going on in there is one of the ways to freedom, in
Yes.
fact,
Yes.
and to the discovery of the self. So just to go back then briefly to the shadow self, do you talk specifically with your clients about how we project? So particularly with the couples in your
Yes.
book, do you want to
Yes.
explain what projection is and how that can destroy
Yes.
relationships?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I had a conversation this afternoon with someone, and it was quite a clear example of how the story has a self-fulfilling prophecy aspect to it. And again, this is the unconscious. So unconsciously, for example, someone might say, "No one listens to me," and they might get louder and louder and more dramatic, but deep down, they have an unconscious belief that they're not going to be heard. Yep. So, and that's, of course, and Jung and Freud were amazing at bringing that to our consciousness. Yep. That the unconscious has such an influence on our lives. And in terms of projection, of course, yes, from the story, we project out onto others, people from our personal drama. And we see that classically with couples, because of course, you know, that's where the most intimate exchanges happen, and that's where the projections most happen. Now, I think what Jung brought more than anyone was that a wonderful sense of that as a creative process.
Yep.
That's the beauty of that. I mean, people often see it as a problem, and on a functional level, it's a problem, or a failure of communication, or something like that. Of course, we can see it like that. But actually, it's us seeking freedom from those projections, from what we're caught with. And what better way to do that than to project them onto someone else and then try and manage them in that sense. So a lot of the work, and you described the practical aspects of the work, a lot of the work would be to encourage people to embrace what's projected as them. So in a way, hopefully to stop projecting it onto the other and claim it back in that sort of unification of the self.
Brilliant. I am cooking something in the lab. Those who are regular listeners will know that I'm just stirring something up here over on the side, and it is a potion that I'm calling Mindful Me. And you talk a lot in your book about reaching this state of sitting in the stillness. And I don't want us to not talk about that. So let's imagine that one of the things, this Mindful Me potion that I'm cooking up in the lab, is going to enable me to better sit in the stillness. So how do I know when I'm sitting in the stillness, and how do I get to that point.
Yeah. Yes. That's really helpful. The first thing to say is that stillness is fundamental to us. So again, there's nowhere to go and find it. There's nothing to develop. There's no skills. It's inherent. It's fundamental to us.
You wouldn't think that looking at our society, would you?
You wouldn't. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's sort of manic, isn't it? And we could maybe come to it. But the whole lockdown thing, I think, was really interesting from the point of view of stopping us, keeping us more still in that sense. But it's fundamental to us. So the process of mindfulness is that process of watching the agitation, watching the little movements of the mind, watching the sensations in the body, or listening or watching. And the listener is that stillness. The observer is that stillness. So fundamentally, as soon as we're present and aware, noticing and accepting the fundamentals of mindfulness, the ingredients of mindfulness, if you like, for your lab, then we can trust that takes us to that fundamental state of stillness, because it's the stillness that observes.
So when I'm meditating, or when I'm putting myself in a time of stillness, I'm not battling then with the thoughts that what am I doing? I'm accepting them.
Yes.
Using them as insights into what I'm dealing with as a true self. The things that need maybe embracing and healing. Is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. There's a nice little story of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's the Vietnamese Buddhist mindfulness teacher, and he had his nephew round to play with some other little kids. They're only about 5 or 6, and the nephew poured out some apple juice, some freshly squeezed apple juice, into some glasses, and because he was the host, he got his last, and it was completely cloudy with the sediment. So he said, "Oh, Uncle Monk, what shall I do?" And Thich Nhat Hanh says, "Well, just go out and play and come back and see what's happened." And the little lad comes back, and of course all the sediment's just gone to the bottom of the glass. And he says, "Oh, has it been meditating like you, Uncle Monk?" So he's absolutely understood the process. So it's gravity that does it. It's fundamental. And any doing, the trouble with any doing or any struggling is it's not stillness. It's activity. It's agitation. Like a snow globe. If you put a snow globe, you just set it down, and then it settles.
Okay. There is one character in your book that I want to quote, if I may.
Yeah.
It's Superwoman. Do you want to just quickly tell us a little bit of the background of Superwoman, why she came to you?
Yes, sure. This is a colleague who came for supervision, and she's a consultant colleague, and she was driving to work and got to halfway there and just thought, I can't go in, and she stopped in a lay-by and just thought to herself, I'm having a breakdown. It was in the context of a very complaining and litigious family who were very making her life very difficult. And here she was, very competent, very able, very, very professional and open-hearted woman, and she just sort of hit this brick wall, really. And she went to her GP. She's a psychiatrist, so she thought, do I need medication, or what do I need here? Do I need to take some time off work? Which she did take a bit of time off work. But the key thing, I don't know if you were going to quote this, but the key thing was, when she came to see me, she said, the difference was I didn't see fearlessness fear in your eyes. I saw a fearlessness.
Yeah.
And that, I think, really is on the theme of alchemy, because I think we can trust these processes. It was her dark night of the soul.
Yep.
But we can trust them to transform us. In that, and then in that chapter, she describes how that really changes her in all sorts of ways.
But you prove the point that I make in my book is that actually one of the wonderful things about all things being one and us being connected through the collective unconscious is that you were at the alchemist, to use the metaphor of the story of the alchemist, when he's at the oasis, Santiago's at the oasis, and the alchemist comes on his horse, his white stallion, with his hawk and his sword. Love that imagery.
Yeah.
That was you for Superwoman. I'm just going to read what she says following on. I mean, she says, yes, I did not observe the same fear in your eyes, just as Santiago was scared to even look into the eyes of the alchemist because he thought it would make him fearful. But, you know, on the contrary,
yes,
he didn't see fear, he felt trust. And she says this about you, that it was your complete trust in the process and your belief that this is an opportunity that has allowed my anxiety to settle, as you just said in that lovely analogy of the apple juice.
Yes.
Initially only for short periods of time, but in turn, it created a stillness within me. From this stillness, I have been able to explore my feelings and my beliefs and my values. I became more curious. I realized that by developing strategies to avoid stress and anxiety, I have inadvertently numbed to these emotions by both positive and negative. And I began to recognize that I had continued to use these strategies to keep me safe, but they were outdated and they were now unhelpful. And I realized that the 6-year-old within that I was protecting was no longer there.
Yes.
And I felt like layers of complexity have been stripped away, and I got in touch with my own core sense of self. And even in the depths of despair, I think I realized that this might be a gift. So that is just a wonderful statement by her.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, you know, and as we read through your book, we discover that this is, you know, a regular occurrence.
Yes.
How many people are there in the NHS, Martin, doing what you do? I mean, I'm a bit worried that when you hang up your boots and you decide you're getting too old for this, are you managing to mentor? Are they younger people, particularly in parts of the country where the more deprived parts of the country where people can get this sort of help?
I mean, obviously, it's limited the sphere of influence that I have, but it's interesting you say that. A psychiatrist colleague who does a lot of teaching for the trust said, I've got a medical student who you might like to talk to, who's got very interested in non-duality, etc. And he was writing, he had to write an essay for his medical training, his psychiatry training. And we had a couple of lovely exchanges, and he was really interested and passionate about these ideas, probably 22, 23, something like that. And I think there's a growing interest alongside our, you mentioned it earlier about our sort of our cultural busyness and our acquisitions and celebrity. There's a tiredness to that, I think, and there is an interest in something deeper, something beyond that, really.
There's a renewed interest because of COVID in what I call the village again. And I was one of the very first adopters of the internet back in 1990. So if you read my book, The Secret of the Alchemist, when I met Paolo in 1993, and so I met Paolo Coelho in 1993, and I was actually the first person to read his manuscript in English, because I caught the vision. I was the first person, he said, in the English language to actually catch the vision that this was going to be a bestseller. And I engineered things in HarperCollins in a way that to make sure that we gave it that perspective. And he thanked me, and the way he thanked me was to do a day of his alchemy magic on my behalf. And that's the origins of this. That's where this book began. And one of the things that I tried to pioneer, which has now become morphed into things like Facebook and Instagram, social networks, was this concept of community.
Yes.
The thing about what we were trying to do in those early days in the internet was that we were trying to build camaraderie and build interdependence, and so we were there for one another. Sadly, this is, so much of social network has become, still is that, which is wonderful, but other parts of it have become, this is a place for us to project our shadow and point the finger and disagree, and it doesn't matter what I think as long as I've got an opinion approach to life. And I think, I think I agree with you that we've probably moved into a time maybe when we can reflect, but hopefully the people who need to reflect on that are taking the opportunity to see how destructive that is and how we can rebuild, hopefully, from this one. I'm going to give you the last word. Is there anything in particular that you'd like us to, we're almost out of time, so is there anything you'd like us to take away, to think about for the rest of, after listening to you today? What would you like us to think about?
It's funny, what comes to mind, when I nearly said it earlier on, there's a little Zen poem that I really like, and says a lot about this type of meditation, really. Because, of course, in Zen, they call it just sitting, literally just sitting. And the little poem runs, nothing to do, nowhere to go, no one to be. And I just found that really sort of profound in helping us stop. As you say, there's all that busyness, isn't there? So there usually is something to do. There usually is somewhere to go, and there definitely is someone to be. So to allow the deep meaning of that poem in meditation, I think it's the definition of sitting in the stillness.
Maybe your next book will be called Zen and the Art of Psychoanalysis. That would be a good one. Thank you, Martin, for writing this book. So everybody, just to refresh your memory, this is called Sitting in the Stillness, and it's by my wonderful guest, Martin Wells, and it's being published on the 1st of September. Have I got that right?
No, it's already out.
It's already out. Oh, okay, fantastic.
End of February it came out.
Fantastic. So there's no excuse. We can order it today. Go to Amazon, everybody, now. Order it on Amazon or your favorite online bookstore if you don't like Amazon. It's everywhere where all good books are sold. Have you got an ebook as well as a Kindle version?
Yeah, there's a Kindle version as well as the book, yeah.
Have you thought about doing an audio book, Martin? I'm putting you on the spot.
No, yes, a couple of people have asked me actually. Yes, I haven't. I don't know what's involved, but yeah. I mean,
you could get some of those clients of yours to anonymously come in and voice over their parts. That would be that would make for an interesting audiobook. Thank you, Martin, so much for spending time with us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
We wish you every success with the book and also in your work and for the future there in the NHS.
Thank you. And to your book too. Thank you.